We're going to talk about the history of MODAPTS. I'll give you the definition of MODAPTS. We'll look at some applications, the advantages of it, a little introduction to it, element classes, and a summary of MODAPTS. MODAPTS was introduced in 1966 by Chris Heide from Australia. It's been tested and proven in over 40 countries around the world. It's extremely simple to learn, and it creates trust and prevents misuse in routine tasks. It calculates standard job performance and times, motivated and qualified workers that adhere to the standard methods. Output is achieved at a natural pace without ever overexerting. Definition of MODAPTS is modular arrangement of predetermined time standards. Time standards is being the key words, that everything is done to a standard rather than a stopwatch. MODAPTS is generally applied to repetitive tasks, short to medium length cycles. It calculates the time it will take to complete a given job when working at a standard pace. So that is to say that you'd have an average worker that is fully qualified working at a standard rate, never overexerting. MODAPTS can be used for several purposes, such as line balancing, job costing, basic building block for developing standard work instructions. Some of the advantages of MODAPTS is not very complex. It's extremely simple to learn. It's method sensitive. It encourages method improvement. When the studies are being done, you can often find steps that either should be taken or should not be taken that are commonly being done. It highlights ergonomic concerns right off. You can really improve your safety and job performance in that standard. It's inexpensive. There's no royalty fees. There's no controversy when it's complete. Once you understand the MODAPTS and you actually look at it, there's really no way to argue with the results. Maybe one of the most important factors is it's embraced by labor unions all over. It is one of the few time studies that the UAW will even allow within one of their plants. Advantages is the accuracy of the standards derived from MODAPTS is comparable to other acceptable techniques such as MTM, MOST, and even Stopwatch. It's possible for the average supervisor to learn MODAPTS and establish the standards. The average employee is able to understand MODAPTS and how it's calculated. Once you have that understanding, most people will buy right into it and accept what it's doing. Once they see that they're not actually being judged on job performance, they're actually being looked at as to the steps that they're taking. Other advantages over Stopwatch is, in Stopwatch, of course, there's a stopwatch required. MODAPTS requires no stopwatch at all, well, at least for the people. If you're going to do a MODAPTS on a machine, you have to utilize a stopwatch in most instances. Without using a stopwatch, people don't feel demeaned. They don't feel like they're being judged. If you're using a stopwatch, you really have to have a performance rating on a person. If you have an extremely high qualified and fast person doing the job, it may not be fair to other people asking them to perform at the same level. And MODAPTS, once again, it goes back to the average worker that has fully qualified in the position that they're doing. So there's no personal critical judgment. Stopwatch is not ergonomically sensitive. You won't, other than visually seeing the ergonomic infractions that happen utilizing a stopwatch, we won't point them out. MODAPTS will point out any kind of ergonomic issue. A person's bending over wrong, a person's picking up too much, lifting over their head. This will all be seen through the study, even when you're going through the report itself. Stopwatch is not method sensitive, so if a person's cutting corners or doing things the wrong way, you won't know it through Stopwatch. Through MODAPTS, once you go through the reports, you'll notice that things are being done incorrectly. So it is very method sensitive. Some of the steps involved in conducting a study is document the elements involved in completing the task. It's the first step you really need to know. Oftentimes when we go to do the study, we'll spend a day just looking over the tasks and everything that everybody's doing so that we have a full understanding of what's being done. Not to say that the practitioner has to actually know how to do the task, but the practitioner does need to have a basic understanding of it. Each element of the study is being analyzed. MODAPTS is done in mod values for each element. A mod is a portion of a second. Each mod will add up and that'll give you a total time value. MODAPTS is a system which relates standard time values to movements of the human body when work is performed. In MODAPTS, basic units of work are expressed as modules, which is shortened by mods. One mod equals 0.129 of a second. Every activity is identified by a two-part code. Now, you don't necessarily need to memorize all of these codes, but you do have to have reference for these codes. There's small reference cards are available to utilize that when you're putting together your reports. The first part of the code is an alphabetical component, which indicates a type of activity. The second part of the code is a number, which represents the time to complete. So the number is in itself a mod. So an example type of activity of a G, that is a get code. So you would actually be getting something, picking up something. 3, that would indicate 3 mods. So you would take the 3 and multiply it by 0.0129, and that would give you the amount of time it took to grab that certain item. If you take a look at the picture on the screen, MODAPTS utilizes 6 different functions. The finger, the hand, the arm, the full arm, the shoulder, and a waist element. So if you look down, you can see some of the different mods it's going to have. The G codes, which are all gets. The P codes, which are all puts. Those would be the 2 codes that you will always have in every mod. You will always get something, and you will always put something. Depending on which part of your body you use to get it, that'll determine if it's a G1, a G0, a G3, and the same with the put code. It could be a P1, a P3, a P5. And remember, the number multiplied by the 0.129 gives you the amount of time. Movement done by the finger, hand, arm, shoulder, or trunk is required to position the part of the arm to perform the terminal activities. Rapid forward and backward or circular motions. Terminal activities are done at the end of the movement, such as a get and a put that we just talked about. Auxiliary movements are activities that are not performed with the finger, hand, or arm, shoulder, or trunk. So it could be walking, it could be bending, it could be seeing, it could be hearing. All of these are counted in MODAPTS. Even as little as thinking and deciding, making a complex decision. Movement class refers to movements through space done by the finger, hand, arm, and shoulder, and the trunk system. Movement class or activities is always followed by a terminal activity. Move to get or move to put. So that's what I was saying. You'll always have a get and a put. So the movement classes are M1, that would be just using your finger. So we're saying if we're just touching something, maybe sliding a coin, that would be an M1. You give you 1 mod. So that would be 0.129 of a second. If you're utilizing with your hand, if maybe you're picking up something, that would be an M2. If you're picking up something that you're reaching for a little bit more, you would have to use your forearm. That'd be an M3. And if you could look at the codes as you go down, and the codes get higher in time. So you got the M4, the M5, and the M7. As each of these tasks are repeated, you add additional time to it. So I may do 4 M4s. Therefore, I have 16 mods. Take a look at some of the examples of the movement classes. Depressing a key, squeezing a trigger, turning down a nut. These are all little finger movements. So each, on the nut, for example, each turn of the nut would be an M1. On the depressing the keyboard, every letter that you push would be an M1. M2 would actually be your hand, maybe turning a door handle, turning over an object, picking something up after a walk. But it's actually just using your hand, not using your entire arm. Now here we come a little more than a forearm. You see if you're turning over your wrist, maybe you're moving a pencil around, moving dividers. Could be several things that you're actually just using your wrist for. And you'll know what it is right away if you repeat the action yourself. We oftentimes will record the actions. That way we can see what it is, and as we sit doing the report, we can imitate what the worker is doing, and we can actually feel what part of our body is moving. The movement class examples, M4 such as full arm. That means your elbow must be displaced. It's common when larger items are involved. Maybe drinking a glass of water. Can be with or without body assistance. You can just lift something up with your arm, or you may end up picking up something heavier, maybe a suitcase. M5 would be your full arm or shoulder. So your shoulder will actually move. It's not real common in office work, but it is more common in the assembly line or in the manufacturing facilities. The M7 is actually moving your whole body, moving the trunk of your body, so we consider it more of a bending at your waist. The feet may be repositioned, but they don't actually ever cross. Uncommon and awkward movements are considered body movements, or M7. Then you would go to the terminal classes, actually what you're getting, what you're doing. The activities that are done at the end of the movement are in close proximity to things being worked on. This class includes two types of activities they get in the put. So you have a G0, a G1, a G3, and the put would be a P0, P2, and a P5. Terminal class, such as the G0, is contact, touching. It's very low conscious control. You're just moving your fingers around. You don't actually even get any time for that. It doesn't take any time to do. But you still want to record what the person is doing because you need to know for the steps of the activity. The G1 is a simple grasp. So maybe picking up a wrench, just basically closing your fingers. It's a real simple task. It doesn't take much conscious or much vision to really do it. The G3 is more complex. So if you cannot throw your hand on it and grab it, then you need to use a G3. So maybe you're picking up a needle, a nail, one ball inside of a bunch of balls. The visual or sensory feedback is required, basically is what you're saying there. So you actually have to stop and look and pick it up. Now the put is basically the same. A P0 is no specific place. Maybe I'm just going to drop it on the table. It's very low conscious. Just wherever it lands, it lands. A P2 is maybe a single feedback. Objects placed in a defined location, which is basically just maybe on the table. It doesn't matter where, just on the table. Then a P5 is something that you need to actually literally look at, maybe putting a Phillips screwdriver into a screw, or putting a thread through a piece of needle. That's all more of the terminal class P5. Then you have auxiliary classes. Auxiliary classes are not performed with finger or hand, arm, shoulder, and trunk. This class includes walking, bending, inspection, deciding, seeing, hearing. It goes on. Extra force is an auxiliary class. So if I'm torquing a bolt after I've tightened it up already, adding additional force to it, you would use an X4. J2 is a juggle, but it's not actually the juggle that you think that you can see down below, the little stick figure juggling the balls. That's not the juggle you're referring to. It's actually when you have something in your hand and you move it to your other hand. That's actually a juggle. So if I'm changing hands back and forth with an object, we're juggling it. One time is a J2. If I do it 2 times, it'd be J2, J2, etc., etc. The only time the juggle is ever awarded is if all other activity has stopped. So if I'm actually picking something up and I can't take my next action until I move it to my other hand, that is the only time you could ever use a juggle. Then we have an auxiliary class of an F3, which is the foot action. So maybe on a sewing machine, maybe on a piano. Then we have the bend and a rise, which is a B18, inclusive both the down and the up. So basically, if your hand goes below your knee, you would use the B18. S30 is a sit and stand. This, once again, is both sit and stand. So if you're sitting for the entire day in your office, you would only use an S15. If you're going to sit and stand as part of your task, well, that would be the S30. So oftentimes you'll see during a MODAPTS study an S15 awarded, and then you'll see several other activities, and then you'll see an additional S15. Maybe the person was sitting to do several activities, and then they stood back up at the end of it. Then you have a walk class at W5. It's defined as actually lifting the entire foot off of one location and placing it down into another. So every step would be a W5. So you may have 20 steps. So you have 20 W5s. You have the U's. This is 1 revolution. Indeterminate moves do not terminate in get or put. They're usually associated with the use of a tool. Less time is awarded due to rapid back and forth movement. You take a look, kind of what we're talking about, brushing something off, utilizing a hammer. We have the crank class, maybe using a pencil sharpener. You can see the different parts of your body that you use to do it. You'd be rewarded higher. Use a C4 if it's performed with your forearm, a C3 if it's just your wrist. If you have a larger item, you would utilize your entire arm. Other auxiliary classes are R2, R3, which are read and mental activity. It's used when the words are not spoken. R2 is for silent reading, familiar words to get overall message. R3 is when each word has to be registered as proof of reading. Use R3 for reading up to 3 digits. Some of the rules are I travel from one end of one line to the beginning of the following line. I travel is only allowed when next reading is done on a different sheet or display. Punctuation marks are ignored. Reading is kind of tricky to do the study on. Oftentimes with the reading, you might see your practitioner actually utilize a stopwatch at that point. The summary of MODAPTS is the 3rd generation predetermined time system. It's easy to learn, it's easy to apply, it's extremely reliable, extremely consistent, It's accepted all over the world in almost every industry. It can be used for establishing time standards. It can be used for line balancing, job costing, etc.